We are here to speak about the topic of centralized media in general, public information and media. And I'd like to focus to begin with on the centralization of for-profit ownership of media, management and operations, and ownership of outlets, stations and newspapers and all that. And I wonder if you have some opinion on it. Is it good or irrelevant?
I think, Pedro, that so you're talking about centralization of media, and I don't think that that is the best for media. We want to move away from a centralization. More independent voices is better. So you have in Vancouver, for instance, right? You have massively centralized. The Post Media Network owns most of the papers, The Sun and the Province and National Post, and that. And then you have something like the Tyee, which is created almost in reaction to that as an independent paper. And they get to bring a different voice. And I think more different voices is better, because you can have many different journalists, many different voices, but if they're all under the same umbrella, I think that's constraining. So I think we want to open that up, right?
Okay, so do you think the provincial government has any clout on it? Can the provincial government regulate how the media is owned, or is it mainly a federal issue?
No, I think provincially there are things we can do. I mean, we have independent review boards set up, right? We review media in this province. So I think we can put some guidelines in place. Now, I think for the Green Party, the way we'd go about doing that is not so much mandating that there must be so many independent papers, but making it easier for people. You know, it's about small business, it's about local business, and that's the same. Grassroots democracy, grassroots media, and it all starts with the community. It all starts by small independent papers.
Now, the provincial government does have a TV station called the Knowledge Network.
Yes.
Do you find it do you find it problematic that they appoint the board of directors and also sponsor they provide all the financing for the station? Do you think is there any problem with it, or that's fine?
Again, this is about bringing in local people, right? It's about bringing the community into that. I know funding has been cut back to the Knowledge Network, and I think there's a lot of potential in the Knowledge Network. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily by bringing the funding back, or maybe going into the community and finding people who have ideas that should be shared.
Or want to pay for it?
Yeah.
Like PBS in the States, that they ask people to contribute.
Yeah, maybe.
Knowledge Network does that to a degree.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering if you find any if it's a problem that when they are funded by the government, they might be influenced by political issues, or it depends who is in power.
Yeah, I mean, I think that risk is always run. Again, I think we do have some checks and balances in place, and I think we could enhance that, right? The media should stay independent, right? They have that duty to uphold the
balance of information. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, is there an opportunity for the government to use their powers for evil instead of good? Of course, right, yeah. But I do think that that's somewhere, and I think, again, the Green Party thinks that by building independent review boards, right? So you can have the directors, you can have a board of directors running the Knowledge Network, but if you have independent checks and balances, I think that's the way that you keep.
And what would those independent checks and balances would be mean? Like, is it another board of directors that supervises?
No.
What would it be?
No, this would be going to what we already have in place in BC and expanding on that, because we don't really have specific laws governing the media here, and I think that's good, right? It's freedom of speech, right? But I do think something that we have that we can expand on.
Do you have any findings on this media conglomeration?
Well, I've never done a lot of direct research on the history of it. I mean, I was in radio back in the 80s, so I was interested in the history of radio and television and that. And when we look at radio and television, I think we have a lot more venues for people to express their opinions than ever before. I mean, I think back when I was a kid, in Vancouver, we were one of the first houses to get cable in the early 60s or mid 60s, and we only had 7 channels, of which 2 were Canadian. And so the Canadian news was either the CBC or it was CTV, and that was it. And now we have a lot more choices. And in my household, we don't have cable anymore. We watch everything online, so we get our news from everywhere.
You seem to know that there is some specific checks and balances, some regulations, and I don't know what they are. Do you?
And I think one of the ways that you actually make a check and balance is to have a strong media, right? So that's a decentralized media.
Decentralized media. So somebody else, another media will check
Exactly.
the media that's giving the wrong information.
Well, yeah, and they say, we're doing, if the government starts using the knowledge network to spout out policy, and then the other one says, well, look, no, that's not right.
Right.
And then you have competition in the media. It's great, and it builds stories. It's good for that economy.
But if CBC and the knowledge network are financed by the government, they risk losing the financing that they already have. So it is a problem when they're financed by a government, and the government wants to advertise some of their policies.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, can you think of some alternative to it? What can we do about it?
To move away from what we've seen with the knowledge network?
Influence government or political parties' influence to the public broadcasters like CBC and the knowledge network. I know CBC is more federal, but we have the provincial branch here, and can we do something about it?
I think provincially, with the knowledge network, even with the CBC here, but that's federal, I think the government should continue funding it to be an independent voice. And I do think, yes, you run the risk of losing that independence, and yes, you run the risk of losing funding by keeping that independence, but I do think that the idea is right.
Do you see any problem on the management and operations of CBC or the knowledge network, in the sense that they get appointed directors, and therefore the policies of the government get perhaps influence the outcome of the production of CBC and the knowledge network, and also the dependence, economic, financial dependence on government grants. If you don't do as we tell you, we might cut your grant a little lower, like they're doing with CBC.
I mean, I think it's always been the idea of a government-funded media. I think is always a problem, because ultimately, if you're on the front lines doing the programs, it may not be a big impact. But your problem is if you're on the senior levels in the executive, running the corporation that is providing this media, you're always going to be aware of the impact of government influence because of money with the government, and ultimately you have to be answerable to who is paying you. And if the government is paying you, the government indirectly, even if they're not trying to, is going to have an influence on you. You're going to make sure that you don't cause problems. And I think it really reduces the ability to be truly independent and thinking out there. But the problem is the alternative is if it's not from a government source, then you start talking from a corporate world, but then you have a different set of masters to answer. So how do you even begin to approach a model that is mass media where you don't have the influence of either a private corporate sector or of a government sector?
That's the question. How do we do it?
Media trust.
A media trust.
What you do is you create a you create a foundation that then would fund it in perpetuity through some form of trust. And do it in that direction. And I don't have any good examples of that at the moment, but it strikes me as the only way to make it truly independent.
You are thinking of PBS maybe from the States?
And PBS is constantly worried about getting money from its viewers. Its sponsorship thing is big now. I mean, they are they're not for profit, but they are run like a corporation now, and really run like a corporation, try to make a profit. And they are very concerned about their money that they get from the federal government in the United States. They get a lot of money from the federal government, and are always trying to ensure that they don't lose that. So what I'm talking about is where if we had, say, an initial endowment of several $1 million, which then would produce an ongoing annual income, and then that would then be a trust, which would then provide the media outlet with that money as an operating income every year that could not be messed with by anybody.
Yeah, and the trust directors would be elected by the viewers?
You'd have to come up with some sort of model of how you would make it a broad-based model so that a lot of people would have a say of who the directors would be. And I don't have an immediate idea of what the right model would be. I would think a cooperative type of model. You would choose to become a member, and then you would have a vote in what happens.
Yeah.
Okay, let's change the subject here a bit to the question of media consolidation. In a recent 3-decade period, starting in 1983, there was 50 corporations that dominated media ownership. And by 2004, the number had dropped to 5. And this is a title of a book by Ben Badikian, can't pronounce his name very well. And the book title is The New Media Monopoly. In the US, these are the 5 big ones: Time Warner, Walt Disney, Murdoch, Viacom, Bertelsmann. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a parallel path that has gone with Canada, and it just so happens in Canada there's 5 big ones as well: CanWest, Bell Canada, Quebecor, Torstar Corporation, and Rogers.
Is it important where's the money come from? Who's paying for it?
Of course it does. I mean, ultimately, if you're not a voter in the election and you contribute money, be it a corporation, be it another person, be it an interest group, you're not giving money. You're giving money with the intent to have an influence. You want that party to win, or you want to have influence over that party. Nobody's giving money away for free. There's no, it's, so, I mean, if a company gives money to a political party, the intent is either we really believe in this political party and we want them to win, or we want to influence their decisions in the future. And it's one or the other. I mean, there's no other reason they would do it.
Business funds that as well. Now, does that mean business is promoting their own goals? Sure, but we have party politics in BC. A business is going to come to the party that they think best represents their goals and is going to get that done. Does that mean that particular companies might fund particular parties? Of course. And might those particular companies be very, very wealthy? Sure. That's a risk. It's an inherent risk.
Is that something for sure that it will benefit, because the money that they're giving to a political party is not a charitable gift, but an investment?
Yeah. No, that's exactly it.
So who sponsors the campaign is very important. How much? Are there any limits right now that regulations by BC elections on defining how much a person can do and how much a corporation can contribute?
No, there's absolutely no limits. So if you happen to find a Colombian drug lord with a couple of extra million lying in their pocket, they can give it to a political party and they can spend it all.
But he wouldn't want to legalize marijuana, because then he'll be out of business.
Well, I presume so, but yeah. But no, seriously, there is, as long as you record who it comes from, and it's public record who it comes from,
Okay.
there is no restriction to the amount of money in BC that you can donate to a political party. You only get a tax credit up to a certain percentage, up to $1,100 a year, and beyond that you did get no tax benefit.
Okay.
But you can give, there's nothing stopping you giving several $1 million. There's
So
no reason that you can't.
right, so corporations are in the right place to give money because it's a write-off for their income tax.
I'm curious why, I mean, it's not a business expense, I would think. I mean, it strikes me as,
Well, it's
I
political
think,
contribution,
well,
not
it's a political contribution. I think that the Canadian Revenue Agency should go through and say this is not a legitimate business expense because involvement in politics is not a legitimate part of a business. It's not a legitimate thing for a business to
Freedom
do.
of expression, they say in the States.
Yeah, well, that's not that freedom of expression is not giving money. Money has nothing to do with freedom of expression. If a corporation wants to say things, they can say things. But anyway,
There's a loophole that people can justify.
it's
some
a
way or-
loophole. It should be gone.
But now, the amount of money that political parties receive influence greatly on the outcome of the voter turnout. And we see that in political issues in the States, Obama and others, how much money they raise. And does it happen in the same way here between the Liberals, the NDPs, the Greens? How much money you get, let me tell you who's going to win.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it's, in part, you're restricted to how much money you can spend in BC in an election. And the spending is restricted enough that it is not physically possible to buy an election here.
Okay.
If you're running for MLA, the absolute maximum that you could spend pre-election writ, post-election writ, is, if I remember correctly, $146,000 and change. $146,000 doesn't go a long way. It doesn't buy you a lot of stuff. You can't hire a full-time campaign to show up and do all your work for you because there's not enough money there to do it. Political parties they are allowed to spend in the millions of dollars, but it's still, given what it costs for advertising on television, full-page ads in the Vancouver Sun and all that sort of thing, it's very hard to compete against all the other advertisers out there. So our restriction here on how much you can spend certainly limits what can be done, and it means that you make a lot more headway being in the media as opposed to buying space in the media.
What's the difference?
Well, so if you become interviewed on a television program, or
So that's not
there's a
advertising.
newspaper
Okay.
story.
Yeah. So you don't think that it affects as much the amount of money that political contributions come to a party? You said that they can contribute with millions, and I was thinking, how if you don't spend it on media, whether it's printed or radio or television, what do you spend the money on? Science, which is another form of media.
Yeah,
Science,
I mean, it's, okay, leaflets, mailings, phone calling, polling, research, there's a certain degree of staff. I mean, there's a lot you can spend it on. You can use your money very quickly on a lot of stuff and have very little impact out of it.
The main political parties like the Liberals, NDPs, and Greens, you don't find any unusual donations that are coming to their coffers.
Unusual insofar as they make me go, what is that? No.
Yeah, like, why would a big corporation give $100,000 to a political party?
Well, influence. I mean, what we've had happen in this province is, for a long time, the NDP would not take corporate donations. And then they loosened and as I remember correctly, if it was, the intent was that, your plumber or your baker, your people who are self-employed, people who are working class self-employed types, could then give money from their business. And they changed it to that. And then the EDP took from some small scale business and that sort of stuff, and they were getting, small, some money now from corporations or the business community, but not huge amounts yet. But last year, the NDP took almost $1 million from corporations.
Big corporation.
And not like Bob's Bakery around the corner. We're talking about, the Aquilinis in Vancouver, developers, also the owners of the Canucks. They gave more money to the NDP than they gave to the Liberals. And they're not doing this because they love the NDP. They're doing this because I'm assuming they must be. Yeah, Vander Kerkhoff, the Super Save empire, they've been rabidly anti-NDP at various points. Vander Kerkhoff, he gave them a lot of money last year. Well, I mean, assuming this has got to be doing something with, well, if we do this, we'll influence the NDP and they'll be, do what we, they will somehow be a nicer government to us. And we won't know until next April from now what they've been given in 2012 and 13.
Okay, so these numbers you have are from 2011.
No, that's for 2012.
Okay.
So until December 31st, 2012. Now, whatever's been given since January 1st,
Okay, which is
we
the
won't
campaign,
know till
yeah.
next year.
Next year, okay.
Though the actual election campaign, the writ expenses, those we will know in the summer. But the actual yearly numbers, which they could raise a lot of money in the first part of the year, before that, we won't know till next April.
Yeah. Who are the biggest contributors to the Liberals?
I can't remember off the top of that. I had the list.
That's-
I have the list somewhere, and I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay. But are they
They're-
basically the same people that are supporting the NDPs?
No, not necessarily at all. Number of the companies, the biggest donations to the Liberals, I'm trying to remember now, we're in the $350,000 range. And if I remember correctly, those companies did not give money to the NDP, but I can't be certain. In the same way, the biggest donors to the NDP still were the unions, and they weren't giving, very few unions gave money to the Liberals. A few do.
Oh, really?
A few unions have always given money to the Liberals, but not a lot of them. Often it's like the firefighters or, you know. Yeah, the biggest ones, still by far the biggest ones for the NDP were from the unions.
Mm-hmm. And who is financing the Greens?
Not enough people.
No,
Quite simply,
corporations,
I mean, the Greens have basically a few some small businesses give money to the Greens, but there's not many of them. The Greens are disproportionately a lot of smaller scale donations from about, if I remember correctly, about 900 people across the province. The total green income for last year was smaller than the largest donations to the NDP or the Liberals. And the same was true of the BC Conservatives. And after that, no other political party raised any money of any significance at all.
Okay, let's go on now to a little different section now. Let's look at some of the tools and mechanisms of manipulation that they use to have us go along with their train of thought. Secrecy, codes of silence. We've talked a bit about public relations companies. Propaganda masquerading as news. Propaganda, glorification of war. Any of you heard about Operation Hollywood? It's a book. Okay, pretexts to hide true motive. Black or white, us versus them. You're either with us or you're against us. Fear-mongering, inducing paranoia with constant repetition. Smear campaigns ad hominems. That's the same as a character assassination. Demonization of dissenters, protesters. Lying. Partial truth. Always tell the truth. Never tell the whole truth. This was actually an ad man's motto developed in the 1920s that catches how you get people to do what you want them to do. Always tell the truth, because that baits them, and then you switch on them by not telling the whole truth. Pronoun obfuscation, like we Americans won't stand for that. Media kangaroo courts. Fake news, video news releases, which we've talked about. Television-filled trivia shows, distraction. So what's available to counter techniques of manipulation? Let's turn to, let's try and reclaim our brains a bit here. So this is the, it's the activity in the emotional center of the limbic system of the brain is in the center area of the brain here, as you won't be able to tell it exactly. I don't think the lighting is great enough for that. And the power of the limbic system is to supersede and circumvent the neocortex, the prefrontal cortex. On the left side, it's that green area. This is the area where our center of reason is. And what the PR experts do is they try to keep us in the limbic system area by maintaining a political atmosphere of fear and intimidation. And if we recall for a second, Bernays was saying that the practice of propaganda had proven that experts can, quote, control and regiment the masses without their knowing about it. Well, this is how they do it. They constantly appeal to the lower brain centers and try to hold us there so we don't go into the higher center of the brain. But the good news is, of course, is that we can defeat and reverse the effects of propaganda. And the key to it is conscious awareness. Through awareness, we can override the emotional centers and push ourselves up into the neocortex, where we conduct rational thought. And we can do this deliberately by focusing our attention on tools of critical analysis. So here's some things to be thinking about. Freedom of the press or control of the press. Am I fully informed, or do I have limited access to critical information? Is the news I receive truly independent, complete, and unbiased? What would a populist controlled media look like? Media by the people. Some of the things we should know too is we should be alert for euphemisms. Like the Department of Defense originally was the Department of War, and it's just changed to be more palatable, but it hasn't changed its function. The U.S. is still waging wars around the world. Another one is to be wary of what is missing in the news. There's millions of events that take place around the world every day. So why are there just a few specific stories that are on television? You notice how today you can flip the channels and it's exactly the same story. It's just a different face giving it to you. Consider the source, recognize bias. Who pays for the news? Which media mogul is controlling the message? Maintain an awareness of context of history. And just keep reminded that today's elite, like the kings of old, dominate the messaging and the news. And remain aware that the elite must maintain the illusion of a free press. Otherwise, because they don't want to awaken and anger. There is a group called the Project for Excellence in Journalism. They have 9 core principles of journalism. I'm not going to read them out. I'm going to just leave them on the screen, put out by the Pew Research Center. And so that's something to keep in mind when you're comparing bad news with the good news.
Douglas Bowfilter, the author of this book, The Causes of War and Aggression, this time has reviewed the history of media manipulation. He also shows us how to overcome our emotional, reactionary brain by thinking more critically about the often one-sided propaganda we hear from the main media, presented to us as news. When we become aware of the media manipulation, then it's up to us to continue consuming that skewed information, or to start looking at other sources as well. If you look at pacific.ca, our website, you will find a few links for alternative sources of information. You can also read online the booklet that I have written, Perpetual Direct Democracy, offering an alternative political system. Another world is possible, yes, but we have to build it.